I wanted to give my family the life they deserved, but why did my journey break me before it finally built me? I used to think that unconditional love was a warm blanket, something soft that kept you safe from the cold, but after working 3 jobs for 7 years in total silence, I realized that real love is a sledgehammer that breaks you into pieces just so it can build something stronger out of the debris. My name is Leo, and at 28, to understand why I had to break before I could build, you have to understand the silence I grew up in. I was the middle child in a home that felt more like a waiting room for someone else's success. My father, David, 56, was a man who defined his entire worth by a hardware store that had been dying since the early 2000s. He was a good man in the traditional sense. He didn't drink, he didn't yell, but he was stubborn, the kind of stubborn that watches the water rise around his ankles and claims it's just a high tide. My mother, Elena, 54, was a professional worrier, but all her worry was directed at one person, my older brother, Julian. Julian, 31, was the golden boy. In high school, he was the quarterback, the prom king, the one with the $1,000,000 smile. But potential is a dangerous drug if you never actually do anything with it. By his mid-20s, Julian was a series of bad investments, crashed cars, and borrowed money that never found its way back. Then there was Sophie, my younger sister, 22, who was the baby of the family, sheltered from everything, including the reality of our finances. And then there was me, Leo. I wasn't the problem, but I wasn't the solution either. I was just there. I was the low-maintenance child. If I was hungry, I made a sandwich. If I needed clothes, I wore Julian's old ones. If I got a good grade, it was acknowledged with a nod before the conversation shifted back to Julian's latest crisis. I became invisible not because I wanted to hide, but because it was the only way to fit into the limited space my family had left for me. Have you ever felt like you were screaming at the top of your lungs in a crowded room, but not a single person turned their head? How do you find your value when the people who are supposed to love you the most look right through you? The turning point didn't happen with a bang, it happened with a whimper. I was 18, sitting at the kitchen table late at night. My parents were in the living room, thinking I was asleep. I heard my father's voice crack, a sound I had never heard before. He was talking about selling the truck to pay the supplier. My mother was crying, whispering that Julian needed bail money again. In that moment, a terrifying clarity washed over me. I realized that my family was a sinking ship. David was too proud to ask for a lifeboat, Elena was drilling holes in the hull by enabling Julian, and Sophie was just a passenger. If anyone was going to save us, it had to be the ghost. It had to be me. I made a vow that night. I would give them the life they deserved. I would buy my father's retirement. I would secure my mother's home. I would make sure Sophie could go to college without debt. But I also knew something else. I couldn't tell them. If they knew I was making money, Elena would give it to Julian, and David would pour it into the failing store without changing a thing. To save them, I had to deceive them. For the next 7 years, I lived 2 lives. To my family, I was Leo the drifter. I took a job at a massive regional warehouse working the night shift. It was brutal, mind-numbing work. Lifting crates, scanning barcodes, walking 15 miles a shift on concrete floors that made your bones ache. My father hated it. He thought I was wasting my potential. He'd look at me with this mix of pity and disappointment that cut deeper than any insult. Get a real trade, Leo, he'd say. Do something with your life. I couldn't tell him that the waste of time job was funding his survival. I couldn't tell him that every paycheck I earned was being split, 20% for my rent and ramen, 80% into a high-yield investment portfolio I had been building since day one. But the warehouse was just the engine, my mind was the steering wheel. During the days, while my family thought I was sleeping off my lazy night shift, I was educating myself. I didn't go to college, I went to the internet. I obsessed over supply chain logistics. I learned how to code in Python to automate inventory systems. I studied distressed asset management. I read every book on business turnarounds I could get my hands on. I lived in a studio apartment above a garage that smelled like oil and damp earth. I owned 3 shirts. I ate the cheapest food imaginable. I didn't date. I didn't go to parties. I didn't have friends. I was a monk in the church of capital accumulation. This is where the breaking began. You see, when you isolate yourself for a goal, you convince yourself it's noble. But isolation is corrosive. It eats away at your social skills, your empathy, your ability to just be. I watched my 20s evaporate through a window I was too busy working to open. I watched my friends get married on social media while I was analyzing spreadsheets at 3 a.m. What would you do if you had to choose between your own happiness and the survival of the people you loved? Is it heroic to sacrifice your youth, or is it just tragic? The hardest part wasn't the work, it was the resentment. It started as a small seed and grew into a jungle. I'd go to family dinners, the few I couldn't get out of, and I'd see Julian driving a leased BMW that I knew my parents were paying for. I'd see Sophie getting new clothes. I'd see my father refusing to modernize the store, complaining about the economy, while refusing to list his inventory online. I wanted to shake them. I wanted to scream, I am eating instant noodles so you can have this facade. But I swallowed it. I swallowed it until it burned a hole in my stomach. I became cold. I became distant. My mother would ask why I was so quiet, why I never smiled anymore. She didn't realize that I was holding up the sky, and my arms were shaking. I started to hate them. That's the ugly truth I don't tell people often. I loved them enough to save them, but I hated them for needing to be saved. I hated Julian for his selfishness. I hated my parents for their blindness. And most of all, I hated myself for being the only one who saw the cliff we were driving toward. This was the breaking. The Leo who was gentle, the Leo who liked to draw, the Leo who laughed, he died in that warehouse. He was replaced by a machine. A calculator. A cold, hard thing that only understood leverage and risk. The mystery of my family wasn't if they would crash, but when. The crash came 2 years ago, on a Tuesday in November. I got a call from Sophie. She was hysterical. They're taking the house, Leo. Dad's at the store, he won't answer. Mom is, you need to come. I drove over. The house was dark. The power had been cut 2 hours prior. I walked in with a flashlight. My mother was sitting on the couch, clutching a pile of letters. Foreclosure notices. Final warnings. Tax liens. It turned out Julian had convinced David to leverage the store and the house for a guaranteed crypto mining operation. It was a Ponzi scheme. The money was gone. Julian was gone. He had fled to a friend's house in another state when the creditors started calling. My father walked in an hour later. He looked like a ghost. He had locked up the store for what he thought was the last time. He sat down in the dark living room and put his head in his hands. A man of 56, crying because he had failed to protect the one thing a father is supposed to protect, the roof over his family's head. He looked up at me. Leo, he choked out. I'm so sorry. I have nothing to leave you. I have nothing. In that moment, all the resentment, all the anger, all the hate, it vanished. All I felt was the weight of the promise I had made 7 years ago. The reveal. I didn't say it's okay. I didn't hug him. The machine took over. I know, I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. I opened my laptop. The battery was fully charged. The screen glowed blue in the dark room, illuminating their terrified faces. I need you to sign this, I said, sliding a document across the coffee table. What is it? David asked, wiping his eyes. It's a transfer of ownership, I said. I bought the debt from the bank 3 months ago. They were going to auction the foreclosure rights, and I outbid the developer who wanted to tear the store down. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. You bought the debt. Elena whispered. With what money, Leo? You work at a warehouse. I own the warehouse's logistics contract now, I corrected. I started a supply chain consultancy 4 years ago. I've been running it at night. I have savings. I have liquid capital, and as of this moment, I own the mortgage on this house and the deed to the hardware store. They looked at me like I was an alien. They didn't know who I was. The invisible boy had just bought their lives. I paid the electricity bill on my way over, I said, closing the laptop. The lights should be back on in 10 minutes. We have a meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. at the store. If you want to keep it, things change. Everything changes. This is the part of the story where movies usually cut to a montage of happy rebuilding. But real life isn't a movie. The next year was the hardest year of my life. Saving them didn't make them happy. It humiliated them. David was a proud man. Working for his son. His failure of a son ate him alive. I had to be brutal. I fired the 3 employees who had been stealing from the register for years, even though they were David's friends. I digitized the entire inventory. I forced David to learn how to use a tablet. When he shouted at me, when he told me I was ruining his legacy, I didn't back down. Your legacy is bankruptcy, Dad, I told him once, in front of the staff. My legacy is profit. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be open? It was cruel. It broke my heart to speak to him that way. But the soft Leo couldn't save this business. Only the machine could. Then there was Elena. She wanted me to bring Julian back. She wanted me to give him a job. No, I said. He's your brother. She cried. He's a liability, I said. He is not allowed in the store. He is not allowed to touch the finances. If you give him money from the household account I provide, I will cut the account. She called me a monster. She didn't talk to me for 3 months, even though she was living in a house I was paying for. What would you do? Would you be the villain to save the people you love, or would you give in to keep the peace and watch them sink again? I worked 20-hour days. I managed my consultancy in the store. I aged 10 years in 10 months. I was lonely, I was exhausted, and I was despised by the very people I had saved. But then, the numbers started to turn. The online store I built started getting orders from across the state. The specialized tools I sourced, using my logistics connections, brought in contractors who had abandoned us years ago. The store went from bleeding red to breaking even. Then, it became profitable. Really profitable. The tension began to thaw, not with words, but with results. David saw the bank balance. He saw the customers coming back. He saw the respect the suppliers gave me. One afternoon, I was in the back office, buried in invoices. David walked in. He stood there for a long time. I didn't know, he said softly. Didn't know what? I asked, not looking up. That you were this strong. That you were carrying all this. I finally looked up. The shame was gone from his eyes, replaced by something I had waited 28 years to see, respect. I'm sorry I didn't see you, Leo, he said. I was looking for a quarterback, and I missed the general. That was the moment the machine started to crack, and the human started to bleed back in. Julian did come back, eventually. He hit rock bottom. When he showed up at the door, I didn't give him money. I gave him a broom. Minimum wage, I told him. You answer to the shift manager. You're not the owner's son here, you're the janitor. If you're late once, you're fired. Elena tried to protest, but David stopped her. Leo is right, David said. Julian hated me for a month. Then he hated the work. But slowly, the humiliation stripped away the ego. He started to work. He started to show up. For the first time in his life, he earned $1 that he actually worked for. We aren't best friends. We probably never will be, but we are brothers again. I'm sitting in my own office now. The hardware store is the anchor of the downtown district. My parents are semi-retired. I sent them on that vacation to the coast last month. They sent me a selfie, smiling, looking 10 years younger. But I look at myself in the reflection of the monitor, and I see the scars. My journey broke me. It stripped away my innocence. It killed the dream that love is easy. It cost me my social life, my hobbies, and my softness. I have anxiety. I have trust issues. I still wake up at 4 a.m. reaching for a laptop because I'm terrified it's all going to vanish. But it also built me. I know who I am now. I am not the invisible boy. I am the pillar. I am the one who can endure the cold. I learned that you cannot save people who are comfortable in their drowning. You have to wait until they are ready to grab the rope, and sometimes, you have to be strong enough to let them hate you while you pull them to shore. I wanted to give my family the life they deserved. I did that, but in the process, I gave myself the life I deserved, not one of ease, but one of purpose. I realized that the black sheep, or the invisible child, is often the one chosen by fate to carry the heaviest load, simply because they are the only ones with the shoulders built in the dark, strong enough to bear it. The breaking was necessary. You can't build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. You have to dig down, smash the rock, and pour concrete into the dark, empty spaces. That's what I did. I poured myself into the cracks of my family until we were solid again. What do you think? Does true strength come from never failing, or from being broken and putting yourself back together differently? And is it fair that the good child has to sacrifice their happiness to save the rest? Let me know your story in the comments. If Leo's journey resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep building in the dark, together.